My name's Jake, and I never thought I'd end up working in a place like this. A couple of months ago, I was just another guy scraping by in a small Louisiana town, bouncing between odd jobs and barely making rent. I'd done everything from washing dishes at a greasy diner to hauling junk out of people's garages. Money was tight, and I was desperate. That's when I saw the ad. It was late at night, and I was scrolling through a local job board on my phone, half asleep, when a post caught my eye. It was short, almost too short, like it didn't want to give too much away. Groundskeeper needed for private cemetery. Good pay, night shifts, serious inquiries only. Call 555-0132. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the number. Something about it felt off. I mean, who posts a job ad that vague? No company name, no address, just a phone number and a promise of good pay. But I was broke, and the idea of a steady gig, even if it was in a cemetery, sounded better than another week of eating instant noodles. I copied the number and told myself I'd sleep on it. The next morning, though, my landlord left a voicemail, reminding me rent was due in 3 days. That settled it. I dialed the number. The phone rang for what felt like forever. Just when I thought it'd go to voicemail, someone picked up. The voice on the other end was low and raspy, like they'd smoked one too many cigarettes. "You calling about the job?" the man asked, not even saying hello. I said yeah, and he didn't waste time. No small talk. No questions about my experience. "You got a car? Can you start tonight?" I hesitated, but when he mentioned the pay, $25 an hour, cash, paid weekly, I couldn't say no. He gave me an address, told me to be there by 8 p.m., and hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat there, staring at my phone, a knot forming in my stomach. Something about that call didn't sit right, but I pushed it down. Money was money. The address was about an hour's drive out of town, deep in the back roads of Louisiana. I grabbed my work boots, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee, then hopped in my beat-up pickup truck. The drive started normal enough, past gas stations and dollar stores. But the further I went, the emptier the roads got. Paved streets turned to gravel, then to dirt. Old houses, half collapsed and covered in vines, dotted the landscape. The sun was setting, casting everything in a dull orange glow, and a thick fog started rolling in. I turned on my high beams, but they barely cut through the haze. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees, or a flicker of light where there shouldn't be one. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my grip on the steering wheel tightened. By the time I reached the cemetery, it was almost dark. My GPS beeped, announcing I'd arrived, but all I saw was a rusted iron gate half hidden by overgrown weeds. A faded sign hung crookedly on the fence, but the letters were too worn to read. I parked my truck and got out, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and something sour I couldn't place. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, and I stepped into the cemetery. It was bigger than I expected, stretching out into the fog, with rows of crumbling tombstones and moss-covered mausoleums. Some graves looked ancient, their names long faded, while others were newer but neglected, covered in dirt and leaves. The whole place felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I noticed a piece of paper nailed to the gatepost, flapping in the breeze. It was yellowed and curled at the edges, like it had been there a while. I pulled it down and squinted at the handwritten text. At the top, in shaky capital letters, it said, "Rules for the Groundskeeper." Below that was a list, written in the same uneven scrawl. I figured it was instructions for the job, maybe where to mow or what tools to use. But as I read, my stomach sank. The rules weren't about gardening. They were something else entirely. Things like, don't work past midnight, and never step on a grave with a black stone. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of prank, but the silence of the cemetery swallowed the sound. I shoved the paper in my pocket, telling myself I'd read it later. I had work to do. The guy on the phone had told me to check in at the caretaker's shed, so I started walking. The fog was thicker now, curling around the tombstones like fingers. My flashlight beam bounced off the mist, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Every step crunched on the gravel path, and the sound echoed in a way that made me feel like I wasn't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something watching me. But there was nothing, just the fog and the graves. The shed was at the far end of the cemetery, a small wooden shack that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The windows were dark, and the door was slightly ajar, creaking as the wind pushed it back and forth. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into the muddy ground. That's when I noticed something carved into the door. A symbol, like a circle, with a slash through it. It looked crude, like someone had scratched it in with a knife. I didn't know what it meant, but it made my skin crawl. Inside the shed, I found a rusty lawnmower, some gardening tools, and a clipboard with a list of tasks. Mow the paths, clear weeds, don't disturb the graves. Basic stuff, but it felt like a front, like the real job was something else. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. I had 4 hours until midnight, when the rules said I had to leave. I grabbed a pair of shears and got to work, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in my chest. As I worked, the cemetery seemed to come alive in the worst way. The wind carried faint sounds, whispers maybe, or just the rustle of leaves. I couldn't tell. Every so often I'd stop and shine my flashlight around, but the fog was too thick to see much. I kept thinking about that list in my pocket. Those weird rules. Why would someone write something like that? Was it a joke? A test? Or was there something here I didn't understand yet? By 10 p.m., I was sweating despite the chilly air. I'd cleared a few paths, but the cemetery seemed endless. I sat on a bench to catch my breath, and that's when I heard it. A low, distant bell. Just one toll. Heavy and mournful, like it came from deep underground. My heart skipped a beat. The rules mentioned a bell, didn't they? I fumbled for the paper in my pocket, but my hands were shaking too much to read it in the dark. I told myself it was nothing, probably a church nearby or something, but the silence that followed was heavier than before, like the whole cemetery was listening. I decided to call it a night. I wasn't about to risk breaking some creepy rule on my first shift. I grabbed my tools, locked the shed, and headed back to my truck. The fog was so thick now I could barely see the gate. As I walked, I felt it again, that prickling on the back of my neck, like eyes were on me. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, faster and faster, until I reached my truck and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, the cemetery fading into the fog behind me. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake taking this job. The rules kept running through my head, and I wondered what kind of place I'd stumbled into. I told myself I'd go back tomorrow, stick to the rules, and get through it. It was just a job, right? But deep down, I knew this cemetery was hiding something, and I had a bad feeling I was about to find out what. I woke up the next morning with that cemetery still heavy on my mind. My tiny apartment felt too small, like the walls were closing in, and I kept thinking about that creepy list of rules I'd found nailed to the gate. I pulled the crumpled paper out of my jacket pocket and smoothed it out on my kitchen table. The handwriting was shaky, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry or scared. I read it again. and each word made my skin prickle. This wasn't just a job, it was something else, something I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of. But rent was due, and I'd already spent the last of my cash on gas to get out there. I had to go back. The rules were written in black ink, smudged in places like paper had been left out in the rain. There were 5 of them, each one weirder than the last. I read them out loud to myself, half expecting to hear something in the room answer back. Rule 1. Never work past midnight. If you hear a bell toll, leave immediately. Rule 2. If you see a light in the caretaker's shed, do not approach it. Rule 3. Never step on a grave marked with a black stone. Rule 4. If you hear whispering, hum a tune and walk away without looking back. Rule 5. Do not touch the old oak tree in the center of the cemetery. I laughed, but it came out weak, more like a cough. Who writes rules like that for a groundskeeper job? Was this some kind of prank? Or was there something in that cemetery I didn't understand yet? I stuffed the paper back in my pocket and got ready for my shift. The drive out to the cemetery felt longer this time. The fog was back, thicker than the night before, and the back roads seemed to twist in ways I didn't remember. My truck's radio kept cutting out, spitting static instead of music, and I swear I heard a voice in the noise once or twice, too faint to make out. By the time I pulled up to the rusted gate, my hands were sweaty on the steering wheel. The cemetery looked even worse in the fading daylight, like it was waiting for me. The tombstones tilted at odd angles, some half sunk into the ground, and the moss on the mausoleums looked like it was creeping up the walls on purpose. I grabbed my flashlight and the shears from the shed, checking my watch. 8:05 p.m. 4 hours until midnight. I figured I'd stick to the rules, do my job, and get out. No need to tempt whatever weirdness this place was hiding. I started down one of the gravel paths, clipping weeds and trying to ignore how quiet it was. No birds, no bugs, just the sound of my boots crunching and my own breathing. The fog swallowed everything else, making the cemetery feel like it went on forever. Every few steps, I'd shine my flashlight around, half expecting to see someone standing there. But it was just me and the graves. As I worked, I kept thinking about the rules. The first one, don't work past midnight, seemed simple enough. I wasn't planning to stay late anyway. The bell thing creeped me out though. I remembered that low toll from the night before, how it felt like it came from under the ground. I shook it off and moved to the next rule. Don't approach the shed if there's a light. That one was easy. I had no reason to go back to the shed tonight. The third rule, about the black stones, made me pause. I hadn't noticed any graves with black stones last night, but I hadn't been looking either. I made a mental note to watch my step. The whispering rule was the one that got under my skin. Humming a tune, not looking back. It sounded like something my grandma would have told me to ward off ghosts. And the oak tree rule, I hadn't even seen a tree yet, but the way it was written made it sound like the most important one. I worked my way deeper into the cemetery, the fog curling around my ankles like it was alive. The tombstones were old, some so worn I couldn't read the names. Others had strange carvings, symbols like the one on the shed door, circles with slashes or weird jagged lines. I didn't know what they meant, but they made my stomach twist. I kept moving, focusing on the weeds, trying to pretend this was just a normal job. But every time I stopped to wipe the sweat off my face, I felt it. That same feeling from last night, like someone was watching me. I'd spin around, flashlight shaking in my hand, but there was never anything there. Just the fog and the graves stretching out into the dark Around 10:30, I found the oak tree. It was huge, gnarled, and dead-looking, sitting in the middle of a clearing, like it was the heart of the cemetery. Its branches twisted up into the fog, and the ground around it was bare. No grass or weeds, just dirt. I remembered Rule 5, don't touch it. I wasn't planning to, but just standing near it made my skin crawl. There was something about that tree, like it was more than just a tree. I turned away and kept working, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. By 11 p.m., I was ready to call it quits. I'd cleared a good chunk of the paths, and my arms ached from swinging the shears. I was about to head back to my truck when I heard it, whispering. It was faint at first, like the wind carrying voices from far away. My heart started pounding, and I remembered Rule 4, hum a tune and walk away. I started humming the first thing that came to mind, some dumb pop song from the radio, and forced myself to walk toward the gate. The whispers got louder, like they were following me, but I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back. My voice cracked as I hummed, and my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't stop until I reached the gate. When I got to my truck, I was shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse, like the cemetery was holding its breath again. I glanced at the gate one last time, half expecting to see something standing there, but it was just the fog, swirling in the dark. I drove home faster than I should have, my headlights barely cutting through the haze. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and checked it twice, something I'd never done before. Lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about those rules. They weren't just weird, they were specific, like they'd been written for a reason. I kept wondering what would happen if I broke one. The whispering had been real, no question about it, and I'd followed the rule, so I was fine, right? But what about the other rules? What was the deal with the black stones or the oak tree? And why couldn't I work past midnight? I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just an old cemetery with some creepy local stories. But deep down, I knew better. That place wasn't normal, and I had a sinking feeling that the rules weren't just suggestions. They were warnings. I decided I'd go back the next night, but I'd be more careful. I'd watch for those black stones, stay away from the shed, and get out well before midnight. I needed the money, and I wasn't about to let some spooky rules scare me off. But as I drifted off to sleep, I could still hear that whispering in my head, faint and far away, like it was calling me back to the cemetery. I didn't sleep much after that second night. The whispers from the cemetery clung to me, like they'd followed me home. I kept hearing them in the quiet moments, faint and wordless, making my skin crawl. By the time I dragged myself out of bed, it was late afternoon, and I was already dreading going back. But I needed the money. Rent was due, and my bank account was a sad $12.43. I told myself I'd be smarter tonight, stick to the rules, keep my head down, and get out early. No messing around. I grabbed my flashlight, the shears, and that crumpled list of rules, reading it over one more time before heading out. I wasn't going to screw this up. The drive to the cemetery was the same as before. Empty back roads, fog so thick it felt like driving through a cloud, and that nagging feeling I was being watched. My truck's headlights barely cut through the haze, and the radio spat static again, no matter how much I fiddled with the dial. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat, but it was just me. When I pulled up to the rusted gate, the cemetery looked even worse than before. The tombstones seemed to lean closer together, like they were whispering secrets to each other. The air was heavy, thick with that sour smell I'd noticed the first night. and the fog wrapped around everything like a shroud. I checked my watch. 7:50 p.m. I had plenty of time before midnight, so I got to work, sticking to the gravel paths and keeping my eyes peeled for anything weird. The rules were burned into my brain now, especially the one about the black stones. I hadn't seen any yet, but I was careful where I stepped, shining my flashlight on every grave I passed. Most were old, their names faded, some cracked in half or covered in moss. A few had those strange carvings I'd noticed before, circles with slashes or jagged lines that didn't look like any language I knew. I tried to focus on the job, clipping weeds and clearing debris, but the cemetery felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Every rustle in the fog made me jump, and I kept my humming ready, just in case the whispers came back. About an hour in, I was deep in the cemetery, near a cluster of graves that looked older than the rest. The ground was uneven, sinking in places like it had been dug up and never settled right. I was trimming weeds around a cracked headstone when my foot slipped, and I stepped right onto the grave. I froze, my heart pounding, and looked down. There it was, a smooth black stone, half buried in the dirt, right under my boot. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. Never step on a grave marked with a black stone. My mouth went dry. I yanked my foot back, stumbling, and shone my flashlight on the stone. It wasn't natural. It was too perfect, like it had been polished, and it seemed to glow faintly in the beam of my light. I told myself it was just a rock, nothing to freak out about. But the air felt heavier now, like I'd crossed a line. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl, like something waking up deep underground. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through my bones, making my teeth ache. I spun around, shining my flashlight in every direction, but the fog was too thick to see anything. The growl came again, closer this time, and I swear the ground under me felt cold, like ice was spreading through the dirt. My hands shook as I gripped the shears, not that they'd do much good against whatever was out there. I backed away from the grave, muttering, Okay, I'm sorry," like I was apologizing to someone or something. The growling stopped, but the silence was worse, like the cemetery was holding its breath, waiting for me to make another mistake. I turned to head back to the gate, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I saw it, a faint flickering light in the distance, coming from the direction of the caretaker's shed. Rule 2. If you see a light in the caretaker's shed, do not approach it. My stomach dropped. I hadn't gone near the shed tonight, hadn't even opened it. I'd grabbed my tools from my truck to avoid it. So why was there a light? It wasn't steady, like a bulb. It flickered like a candle, or something worse. I stood there frozen, watching the light dance in the fog. Part of me wanted to check it out, to prove it was just a busted bulb or a reflection. But the rules were clear, and after that growl, I wasn't taking chances. I started walking toward the gate, trying to keep calm, but my legs felt like they were moving through mud. The fog seemed to press in closer, and I could feel eyes on me, like something was pacing alongside me, just out of sight. I hummed that same stupid pop song from last night, my voice shaky and off-key, hoping it'd keep the whispers away. But the whispers didn't come. Instead, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not mine. They were slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel somewhere behind me. I sped up, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I scanned the fog. Nothing. Just tombstones and shadows. But the footsteps kept coming, matching my pace. I broke into a run, my boots slipping on the wet gravel. The footsteps got louder, faster, like whatever it was didn't care about hiding anymore. I didn't dare look back. Rule 4 was screaming in my head, "Don't look back." My lungs burned, and my flashlight beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of graves and twisted trees. I was almost at the gate when I tripped, my knee slamming into the ground. The shears flew out of my hand, and my flashlight rolled away, its light cutting through the fog like a knife. That's when I saw it. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just beyond the beam. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel it watching me. My blood ran cold. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the flashlight, and ran for the gate. The footsteps were right behind me now, so close I thought I felt breath on my neck. I reached the gate and threw it open, diving into my truck and slamming the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, the tires spitting gravel as I peeled out. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to know what was back there. When I got home, I locked the door and sat on my couch, still clutching the flashlight. My knee was bruised, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I pulled out the rules and read them again, my eyes lingering on Rule 3. I'd screwed up. I'd stepped on a black stone, and something had noticed. That growl, that shadow, it wasn't my imagination. I thought about quitting right then, calling that raspy-voiced guy and telling him to find someone else. But I needed the money, and part of me, a stupid, stubborn part, wanted to know what was going on. Why were those rules so specific? What was in that shed, and what was that shadow? I decided I'd go back one more time. I'd be careful, follow every rule to the letter, and get out before midnight. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cemetery wasn't done with me. That growl still echoed in my head, and I kept wondering what would have happened if I'd looked back. After that night with the black stone and the shadow, I was a wreck. I barely slept, my dreams filled with that low growl and the flicker of light from the caretaker's shed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tall, thin figure in the fog, just standing there, watching. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like I'd been running. It was Saturday, my third shift at the cemetery, and I didn't want to go back. But rent was overdue, and my landlord had left another voicemail, his tone sharper this time. I had no choice. I grabbed my flashlight, the shears, and that cursed list of rules, shoving it into my pocket like it was a talisman. I told myself I'd be careful, follow every rule, and get out early. No mistakes tonight. The drive to the cemetery was worse than ever. The fog was so thick it felt like driving through soup, and my truck's headlights did nothing but bounce back at me. The radio was dead, not even static this time, just silence. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadow from last night sitting in my back seat. My hands were sweaty on the wheel, and my stomach churned with every mile. When I finally reached the rusted gate, the cemetery looked different, darker somehow, like the fog was heavier, the tombstones sharper. The air smelled sour and damp, and the silence was so thick it pressed against my ears. I checked my watch, 7:45 p.m. I had 4 hours to do my job and get out before midnight. I started working right away, sticking to the gravel paths and keeping my flashlight trained on the ground. I was paranoid about those black stones now, checking every grave before I took a step. The rules were my lifeline, and I wasn't about to break another one. I clipped weeds, cleared leaves, and tried to ignore the way the fog seemed to move, curling around the tombstones like it had a mind of its own. Every sound made me jump, a twig snapping, a leaf rustling, even my own breathing. I kept humming that stupid pop song under my breath, just in case the whispers came back. But the cemetery was quiet, too quiet, like it was waiting for something. About an hour in, I noticed something off. The fog was thick, but I could still see shapes moving in it. Shadows that didn't match the tombstones or trees. They were quick, darting just out of sight whenever I turned my flashlight. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was still freaked out from last night. But my gut knew better. I wasn't alone. I kept working, my hands shaking as I clipped weeds, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. It was like the shadows were circling, pacing, watching me from every angle. I gripped the shears tighter. Not that they'd do much good against whatever was out there. Around 9:30, I found something that made my blood run cold. Near the center of the cemetery, close to that creepy oak tree, I saw footprints in the dirt. They weren't mine. My boots left deep, square marks, but these were different, long and narrow, like they belonged to someone barefoot. They started at the base of the oak tree and led off into the fog, disappearing near a cluster of graves. I remembered Rule 5, don't touch the oak tree. I hadn't, but just being near it made my skin crawl. The tree loomed over me, its gnarled branches twisting into the sky like claws. The ground around it was still bare, no grass or weeds, just dirt that looked too smooth, too perfect. I shone my flashlight on the footprints again, and my heart skipped a beat. They were fresh, the edges sharp, like someone had just been there. I backed away, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The fog seemed to close in, and the shadows moved again, faster this time, like they were getting bolder. I hummed louder, my voice cracking, and started walking toward the gate. I wasn't going to wait around to see who, or what, made those footprints. But as I moved, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, like a weight on my chest. I kept my eyes on the path, refusing to look back, but I could hear it now. Faint footsteps, not on the gravel, but in the grass, soft and deliberate, like someone was following me. By 11 p.m., I was a nervous wreck. I'd cleared enough of the paths to call it a night, and I just wanted to get out. I was almost at the gate when I heard it, a low, mournful bell toll, just like the first night. My watch said 11:58 p.m. Rule 1. If you hear a bell toll, leave immediately. I broke into a sprint, my flashlight bouncing as I ran. The footsteps behind me got louder, faster, and I felt something cold brush the back of my neck, like icy fingers grazing my skin. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I reached the gate, threw it open, and dove into my truck, slamming the door so hard the window rattled. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, and when the engine finally started, I floored it, the tires screeching on the gravel. I didn't stop until I was halfway home, my heart pounding so hard I thought it had burst. When I finally pulled over, I was shaking, my shirt soaked with sweat. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm down. That's when I realized I needed answers. This wasn't just a creepy job anymore. Something was wrong with that cemetery. I pulled out my phone and started searching for anything about it. The signal was weak, but I found a few old articles buried deep in local archives. They mentioned a forgotten cemetery in rural Louisiana, tied to stories of a cursed burial ground. One article talked about a groundskeeper who disappeared decades ago, leaving behind only a journal filled with ramblings about rules and spirits. The details were vague, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I got home and locked the door, checking it 3 times. I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints, the shadows, that bell. I pulled out the rules again, reading them over like they'd tell me what to do. I was done. I wasn't going back. But when I grabbed my keys to make sure my truck was ready for the morning, it wouldn't start. The engine clicked, dead, like something had drained it. I tried again and again, but nothing. I was stuck. I had to go back one more time, at least to get paid and figure out a way to fix my truck. But the thought of walking back into that cemetery made my blood run cold. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in my apartment made me jump, and I kept my flashlight by my bed, like it could protect me. I knew I couldn't keep doing this, but I also knew I wasn't in control anymore. The cemetery was calling me back, and those shadows, whatever they were waiting. I had one more shift, one more night to get through. I told myself I'd follow the rules, keep my head down, and get out. But deep down, I had a bad feeling that the cemetery wasn't going to let me go that easily. I didn't want to go back. After the footprints, the shadows, and my truck refusing to start, every instinct screamed at me to walk away from that cemetery and never look back. But I was broke. My landlord was threatening to kick me out, and I needed the cash from this job to survive. Besides, something about that place had its hooks in me. It wasn't just the money anymore. I needed to know what was going on. Those rules, the whispers, the shadows, they weren't just in my head. I'd found that article about the missing groundskeeper, and it left me with more questions than answers. I had to go back, just one more time, to get paid, and maybe find some clue about what this place really was. I told myself I'd be careful, follow every rule, and get out before midnight. But deep down, I knew this night was going to be different. The drive to the cemetery felt like a funeral procession. The fog was thicker than ever, so dense my headlights barely made a dent. The back roads seemed to twist and stretch, like they were trying to keep me from getting there. My truck sputtered a few times, even though I'd managed to jumpstart it earlier, with a neighbor's help. The radio was silent, no static, no nothing, just a dead hum that made my skin crawl. I kept the list of rules in my pocket, my fingers brushing against it like it could protect me. By the time I reached the rusted gate, my hands were shaking and my mouth was dry. The cemetery loomed in the fog, the tombstones jagged and uneven, like teeth waiting to snap shut. It was 7:40 p.m. I had just over 4 hours to do my job and get out. I grabbed my flashlight and shears, my eyes scanning every grave for those black stones. I wasn't taking any chances after last night. The air was heavy, thick with that sour, damp smell, and the silence was oppressive, like the whole place was holding its breath. I stuck to the gravel paths, clipping weeds and clearing debris, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those shadows again, or worse, that tall, thin figure from 2 nights ago. The fog moved like it was alive, curling around the tombstones and brushing against my legs. I hummed that stupid pop song under my breath, my voice barely a whisper, just to keep the rules in my head. Around 9 p.m., the whispers started. They were faint at first, like the wind carrying voices from far away, but they grew louder, clearer, forming words I could almost understand. "Stay," they hissed, soft and insistent. "Join us." My blood ran cold. Rule 4, hum a tune and walk away without looking back. I hummed louder, my voice shaking, and kept moving, refusing to turn around. The whispers followed, weaving through the fog, and I swear I felt something brush my shoulder, like a cold hand trying to hold me back. I walked faster, my flashlight beam swinging wildly, catching glimpses of tombstones and those creepy carvings, circles with slashes, jagged lines that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. I was near the center of the cemetery when it happened. I was so focused on the whispers, I didn't watch where I was going. My hand brushed against something rough and cold, the trunk of the oak tree. Rule 5, "Do not touch the old oak tree." I yanked my hand back, my heart pounding, but it was too late. The ground shook, a low rumble that made my teeth ache, like something massive was waking up beneath me. The fog swirled faster, and the whispers turned into a chorus, loud and angry, words I couldn't make out but felt in my bones. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling to the ground, its beam pointing at the base of the tree. That's when I saw it. A crack in the dirt, widening, like a mouth opening. It wasn't natural. It was like the ground was splitting to reveal something hidden. I should have run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were stuck in cement, and my eyes were glued to that crack. It grew wider, revealing stone steps leading down into the dark. A crypt hidden under the oak tree. The air coming from it was cold, smelling of rot and something metallic, like old blood. The whispers were coming from down there, louder now, calling my name. "Jake, Jake." I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, like something was choking me. Against every instinct, I grabbed my flashlight and took a step closer. I don't know why. Maybe I was losing it, or maybe the cemetery was pulling me in. I had to know what was down there. The steps were slick with moss, and the walls of the crypt were covered in those same carvings I'd seen on the tombstones. My flashlight barely lit the way, but at the bottom, I found a small chamber, empty, except for a wooden box on a stone slab. The whispers were deafening now, echoing off the walls, and I felt like I was being watched from every angle. I opened the box, my hands trembling, and found a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. It was the missing groundskeeper's journal, the one from the article. The handwriting matched the rules, shaky and uneven. I flipped through it, my eyes catching phrases. They never leave. The rules keep them quiet, break them to end it. The last entry was a scrawl about a ritual, burning the rules under the oak tree to appease the watchers. It sounded crazy, but nothing in this place was normal. I checked my watch. 11:50 p.m. The bell would toll soon, and I had to get out. But the whispers were screaming now, and the shadows were moving in the crypt, tall and thin, closing in. I grabbed the journal and ran up the steps, my lungs burning. The ground was still shaking, and the oak tree's branches seemed to twist toward me, like they were alive. I remembered the ritual and fumbled for the rules in my pocket. Maybe it was my only way out. I pulled out a lighter I kept for emergencies and set the paper on fire, holding it under the tree. The flames caught fast, and the whispers turned into shrieks, so loud I thought my ears would bleed. The fog swirled into shapes, gaunt figures with hollow eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. I don't remember what happened next. 1 second, I was standing under the tree, the burning rules in my hand, and the next, I was in my truck, miles away from the cemetery, the engine idling on a dark road. The journal was on the seat next to me, singed but intact. My hands were black with ash, and my clothes reeked of smoke. I checked my watch. 2 a.m. I had no memory of leaving, no idea how I got there. The cemetery was gone, swallowed by the fog behind me. I drove home, my heart pounding, my mind racing. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and sat on the couch, the journal in my lap. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not yet. I'm done with that cemetery. I don't care about the money anymore. But I still hear the whispers sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet. They're faint, but they're there calling my name. I don't know what I did under that tree, or what those rules were really for, but I know one thing. If you ever see a job listing for a groundskeeper in a forgotten Louisiana cemetery, don't take it. Don't go near that place, because whatever's buried there isn't resting, and it's always watching. Sutton.